Primate classification is really just looking at what makes something a primate. And then within that, what makes something a strepsirrhine versus a haplorhine, a tarsier versus an anthropoid, a cladorhine versus a catarrhine, an old world monkey versus a new world monkey, that classification, or an old world monkey versus an ape, that cercopithecoid versus hominoid, sorry. So that's kind of what we're going to be looking at in this section, is simply what makes something a primate. So when we look at that, first thing we want to look at is the hands and the feet, the digits. So primates have 5 digits on each hand and foot. Their big toe and their thumb is opposable to their fingers. They have prehensility, which is what you're seeing with the chimp hand over here, where the fingers can be touched by the thumb, and in general that the big toe can touch the rest of the toes. That allows grasping ability. So opposability means that the thumb or the big toe can touch the other digits. Prehensility is that the fingers curve. You're seeing both of those with this chimp hand here. And then the primates have fingernails rather than claws. Now there is a small exception to that when we're looking at our strepsirrhines, and we'll talk about that later. Next thing that we want to look at is a clavicle. All primates have a complete clavicle. It runs from the sternum right here all the way over to the scapula on the far side. When we look at the eyes and the snout, primates have reduced emphasis on smell and increased emphasis on vision. So the eyes are getting bigger while the snout length is getting smaller. Also, the eye orbits are coming forward, so they're moving from the outside, where they'd be looking to the right and the left at the same time, to the front. And as they do that, the eye orbit has to enclose. We have to have this bony enclosure. And that can either take the form of this ring, which is something we call a postorbital bar, or this full socket that we see in the higher primates. So those are the things that we look at to help us determine if something's a primate or not. Next, we're going to move on to our first division, which is going to be strepsirrhines versus haplorhines. And when we look at strepsirrhine traits, these are actually going to be some exceptions to some of those primate traits. So to start off with, strepsirrhines have a grooming claw. They have a single claw, and this is only on each hind foot. So you can see it's the second digit, so not the big toe, but the second toe. They have a single claw there. They're also the ones that have just that rim around the side of the eye orbit, called that postorbital bar, as opposed to the full socket that we're going to see in the haplorhines. In terms of soft tissue, they have a rhinarium, which is the wet nose that you can see in this picture here. They have a dental comb, meaning that the front teeth stick straight forward on the mandible. So we've got the incisors and canines here sticking forward, and you can even see that in the full skull down here, where those stick directly forward. They're not vertical. This one here, those teeth are worn down, which is why they look so short, but you can also see that they have a two-piece mandible, that the mandible is actually 2 bones with a suture, so a right mandible and a left mandible. So all those features together, taken with the primate traits, tell you that the individual is a strepsirrhine. If it doesn't have those traits, if it doesn't have the grooming claw, doesn't have the dental comb, has a single piece mandible, has the enclosed socket instead of the postorbital bar, and doesn't have a rhinarium, then we know it's a haplorhine. Now, keep in mind that that rhinarium is only going to be visible in the soft tissue, because it's that they've got that wet nose versus the dry nose that we have. Now, our second division is actually splitting those haplorhines and splitting the tarsiers off of the haplorhines. And here you can see some tarsier traits. So here's that difference with that postorbital plate that we see in tarsiers versus, if I go back a moment here, that postorbital bar that we see in the rest of the strepsirrhines. And then we get into our splitting the haplorhines, and we're splitting catarrhine versus cladorhine. And there's kind of 3 main things going on with this division. And that's going to be the nose shape, which again is going to be soft tissue only, the number of premolars, and the tail. And again, the tail is going to be problematic for us because again, it's pretty much most easily seen in the soft tissue. So here we've got the platyrrhines, and you can see on the nose here, we've got a very wide nose. You can only see one nostril because the other nostril is way over here, and we've got that wide septum. Some platyrrhines, but not all, can hang from their tail, which is what you're seeing up here. But all platyrrhines have 3 premolars. We've got 2 incisors, 1 canine, and 3 premolars here. Now, most of them have 3 molars as well, but there are a few species that have actually lost a molar, and so their formula is going to be 2, 1, 3, 2 in terms of some species. Now, so that's the platyrrhine that separates out the New World monkeys from the catarrhines, which is the Old World monkeys and the apes, and us. We fit in that same category. So with catarrhines, we only have 2 premolars, so 2 incisors, 1 canine, 2 premolars, and 3 molars. But the main thing here is that nose shape. See how different this nose is with that very narrow nasal septum and the nostrils pointing more forward or downward, versus, if I go back a moment, that much wider nose with the nostrils pointing sideways. Then we have our division between Cercopithecoid, which are the Old World monkeys, versus Hominoid. And the major differences here have to do with the difference in locomotion pattern. The Cercopithecoids are quadrupeds, some semi-brachiation, but mainly quadrupeds, whereas the hominoids are suspensory. And so we're going to see some differences primarily in shapes of the body and limbs having to do with this difference. So if we look at our Cercopithecoid here, what we're looking at is a narrow chest side to side here. And it's also going to be deep top to bottom, which you can see from the side view. The scapula is placed on the side of the body. Okay. The glenoid fossa right here, that shoulder joint is angling forward. We have a long lumbar spine. We have a tail, shorter tail we're going to see in the more terrestrial primates, longer tail in the more arboreal. So that's going to have a lot to do with being in the trees, but they're all going to have a tail. The arms and legs are roughly equal in length. And all that corresponds with being a quadruped. Whereas if we look at our hominoid here, this is our ape, this is where we're going to see longer arms compared to legs. We're going to see a broad chest that's not as deep, so it's narrow front to back, broad side to side. You can see that glenoid fossa for the shoulder is angling outward. It's angling laterally instead of anteriorly, instead of forward. You can see that lack of a tail. So again, all of those traits are going to link primarily with the brachiation or suspension locomotion versus the quadruped locomotion of our Cercopithecoids. Now, the last trait doesn't really have as much to do with locomotion. It has to do with brain size and intelligence. Cercopithecoids are not as smart as the hominoids, so they're going to have smaller brains. And when we're looking at brain size, we're looking just at the area behind the eye where the brain's going to be. Okay? And so these hominoids are chimps, are gorillas, but even the smaller hominoids, the gibbons and siamangs, they're going to have a much larger brain compared to their body size than the lesser primates. Now, this is a chart similar to what you have in your book, and what it's just kind of showing you is the divisions. So you're first going to determine, is something a primate? Is it not a primate? If it's a primate, then you have to determine, is it a strepsirrhine or is it a haplorhine? If it's a strepsirrhine, you're going to stop. You're not going to determine any further. But if it's a haplorhine, then is it an anthropoid or is it a tarsier? If it's a tarsier, again, you're not going to take that any further. But if it's an anthropoid, well then, is it a catarrhine or is it a platyrrhine? Is it that New World monkey or is it an Old World monkey or an ape? Again, platyrrhine, we're not going to take that division any further, although there are multiple different divisions within each of these. We're not going to break it down any further. But for catarrhines, we are going to break it down one more level, being the Cercopithecoid, those Old World monkeys, versus hominoid being the apes. And keep in mind that we fit in this ape category. We are hominoids. So when we get to our fourth section of the class, we'll still be in this hominoid category. We'll just be splitting off from it. So from these traits, you're going to be able to fill in a lot of the charts in the lab manual that you're going to be doing for this week's assignments online.